All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our 14th episode of Equity Explorer. I'm Karena, a global equity investment specialist at Fairtree, and I will be moderating today's discussion. So, just to give you some insights on Equity Explorer, it was designed as a teach-in on key themes in equity markets, offering deeper insights into industries, companies, and trends that are shaping global investments. Our goal is ultimately to give you the tools to better understand the forces driving markets and to highlight potential opportunities. However, please do note that this is not financial advice and it does not represent a deep dive into our portfolios. And with that, I'm really excited to introduce today's discussion on the online travel industry, specifically looking at bookings.com and trip.com. We also will look at how they've expanded their reach across the travel value chain and how they've implemented this. Please feel free to send through any questions during the presentation, and we'll try to answer as many as possible at the end. With that, I'd like to introduce Christoff, who will be taking us through today's deep dive. Over to you, Christoff.
Hello, everyone. Like Karina said, my name is Christoff, and I'm an analyst both in the DM and EM fund. I'm very excited for today's presentation because it's a sector that I have enjoyed following throughout the years. So let's start. So today's Equity Explorer, we're going to look at the online travel agencies. So just the contents of today's presentation, we're going to start just a plain basic introduction to the OTAs. Secondly, we're going to look at how the online travel agencies work. Number three, we're going to delve a bit deeper in the business models. And fourth, we're going to look at a very topical point currently that the market is debating, and that's whether AI is going to eat the OTAs. Fifth, we're going to end off by a quick look at the financials. And then six, we're going to move on to Q&A. Okay, so let's dive into the introduction. As in my previous presentations, I like to have a brief look at a brief history of how industry came forth. So again, starting with a timeline. So a lot of you might not know, but the first OTA actually started already in 1994. It was called TravelWeb, and it was actually created by a group of hotel chains basically to bring their product online. In 1996, maybe the first OTAs started to come to market that some of you might be familiar with. So Expedia launched in 1996. At this part, it was actually, or this point rather, it was a product within the Microsoft, Booking.com, but only the Dutch company at that point also launched in 1996. And in 1999, we actually had our first big IPO of an OTA just before the burst of the dot-com bubble. This was Priceline. Priceline had a very interesting business model where you, as a traveler, can basically state how much you're looking to pay for a flight or for a hotel room, and then the hotels or the airlines would auction off their excess capacity basically to the traveler. In 2001, post the dot-com bubble, we actually saw a lot of consolidation in this industry as people were trying to get scale to get a profitable business model. And Microsoft decided actually at the end to sell its Expedia stake. In 2005, Priceline actually acquired Booking.com, the Dutch travel company at that point, but decided to actually keep the Booking.com name. In 2008, we first had the first start actually of alternative accommodation. So that can be a room that you can rent in your house. And this was with Airbnb that was founded. And in 2012, but actually this whole period from 2012 to 2020 has just been a great time for any internet consumer related company, because this was due to the just the penetration increase of smartphones. So we saw that the Booking.com, Expedia business model became a lot more relevant when everyone basically had access to their smartphones, and this is not limited to the travel industry. This is true for DoorDash, Uber Eats, or Uber, sorry, the business as a whole also. In 2015, Ctrip and Cunard had a big merger to create the Trip.com that some of you might know today. And then on 2020, we had COVID that halts basically travel, but online share actually accelerated through this period. And from 2023 to where we are now, it's the big debate in the industry, and that's how AI is going to transform the OTA business model. Plus, if you can look actually at the global picture of the OTA landscape, you actually see that OTAs are quite regionally structured. So the big three that most people know is Expedia, Airbnb, and Booking.com. So if we start with Expedia and Airbnb, they are global brands, but they tend to have a bit more of a heavy exposure to the US. VRBO or Vrbo is owned by Expedia, and it's basically a competitor with Airbnb that kind of functions within that holiday rental type market. Booking.com is slightly tilted more to Europe in comparison to the rest of the brands. And then Trip.com, that is an Asia APAC focused brand. So Trip.com specifically is the leading OTA within China. And then in Asia, so one of the leading OTAs is Agoda. Agoda is actually owned by Booking.com and is basically their APAC arm. In India, we have Make My Trip. In South Africa, everyone knows Lakeslop. And then in Latin America, we have Despegar, which was actually acquired by Prosus. I thought this was quite interesting to discuss with everyone, making reference to Jeffrey's paradox within the AI industry. But basically what Jeffrey's paradox is saying is as the cost actually of something comes down, demand picks up so much that the total consumption actually increased. And this has actually been very relevant in the travel industry. So if you go just look at the employment of US travel agents, so people working at travel agents, employment actually has been quite stable throughout the 2010s, where OTAs actually have been taking a lot of share. Yes, post-COVID, we actually had not recovered to where it was previously, but this was more due to business travel coming down and structurally actually coming down as more meetings, as everyone knows, shifts a bit more online. But interesting to see that even though OTA penetration actually increased, the travel agent employment actually hasn't decreased as much as you would expect. And lastly, before we delve into a bit more of the detail, if anyone thought that today's industry is quite boring, I just wanted to highlight the share price of Booking.com versus Alphabet, which is obviously Google. If you compare that over a 20-year period, surprisingly, Booking.com OTA has actually outperformed Google.com, obviously given some of that back in the recent years as Google has outperformed due to the proliferation of AI. Okay, so delving a bit more into the details, how online travel agencies work. Okay, what are online travel agencies? So online travel agency is basically an internet platform that sits between the traveler as well as the travel provider. That travel provider can be anything from yourself renting out a room, a hotel, B&B, airline selling tickets. But what I want to actually start this with also is as the internet platforms, OTAs are actually quite unique in the sense that they both driven by there's demand side drivers as well as supply side drivers. So a lot of internet platforms you would either say see skew to one side. So example of a demand driven platform is something like social media, where like Meta, Facebook, Instagram, where you actually just where the platform strength is driven by a lot of users and network effects driving them. On the other side, you actually get platforms also that are a lot more supply driven, and that is more like Uber, where the strength of Uber's network is actually determined by the amount of people providing rides, and the more drivers you basically have, the stronger the platform is. But the point that I want to make, and I'm going to show you now, is OTAs are unique, that there's both demand and supply side strengths, and that actually drives the moat of these businesses. So if we go look firstly from the demand side or the traveler, why do travelers choose OTAs? The first and most obvious, I think, thing is price comparison. It's most of these sites first started kind of as like a meta price comparison site before they actually facilitated bookings. Second point, this is sometimes a bit overstated or understated, sorry, not overstated, understated, is trusted reviews and ratings. As someone who travels a lot, I tend to shy away from properties if they have less than a certain amount of reviews, just because you're unsure of the quality of the property. So this reviews part actually is a major driver also. Wide choice of properties, obviously, as more people actually use it, the more properties tend to come available. One-stop trip planning. So on Booking.com, you can plan anything from the taxi to your airport. You can book your flight. You can book your hotel, and they have this vision of a connected trip, basically, where Booking.com going on the site can provide your full travel solution. And then loyalty rewards and deals. This has become a lot more relevant in recent years. So to increase customer engagement, the larger platforms have been increasing their loyalty rewards, and then with those loyalty rewards tend to force down the pricing that the hotels charge. So if some of you are maybe Genius members on Bookings.com, you would see as you progress up that Genius ranking, you tend to get a bit more discounts. Flexible cancellation, which is obviously a big driver of this. If you only have to pay at a certain date, we can still cancel your property. And then lastly, also a big function is the 24/7 support. If you're traveling to a new region and there's something wrong with your property, you should be able to contact any of those platforms that will then service you to get you a refund or book you to another hotel. Okay, so this is from the demand side. And then let's look from the supply side. Why do hotels actually want to use the online travel platforms? So firstly, I need to state for a lot of these hotels, specifically in Europe, a lot of them tend to be independent hotels, and these independent hotels don't have any technology back end, so it's difficult for them on their own to be set themselves up on the internet. So the OTAs provide a platform for basically them to easily just fit in their rooms and be able to service clients. So the first part is pricing and revenue management. So I'm talking now about dynamic pricing. If you're seeing more supply, your pricing gets adjusted up and so forth. Payment and financial services. Think about cross-border bookings, being able to facilitate different currencies with your bookings. And then when someone might have a refund, being able to pay that person back. That's very difficult to do if you're just an independent hotel. Booking and reservation engine. So this is basically, think of providing software to be able to manage when your rooms are booked out and when you have availability. Distribution and visibility. Obviously, the platforms that get the most demand side traction, your property will have the most visibility if you use the OTAs rather than trying to push that individually. Marketing and customer acquisition, this kind of ties into the distribution of visibility. But as a hotel on your own, if you have to market your property on Google, you're going to spend a lot basically to get on top of that, or on top of the search list. Through the OTAs, they provide marketing programs where basically you can push your property higher as a sponsored property. So it's a nice marketing vehicle also. And then just the last two, data and analytics. When during the year are you most likely to get your bookings? And then just customer service, but that ties into the demand side that we spoke about. So I want to emphasize just with this, there's from the demand side, again, and from the supply side, a lot of benefits why the traveler as well as the hotel want to use our OTA. And we can see that just from the number of properties that are currently on the OTA. So on the left-hand side, I just have the number of properties, the major OTAs. So Booking.com has 4.4 million properties, Airbnb 9 million, Trip.com 4.3, Expedia 3.6. I just want to caveat quickly here that this is not completely like for like if you compare Booking.com or let's say Airbnb in terms of number of properties. And the reason for that is Booking.com might have a hotel, which counts as one property, but in that hotel, there's like 100 rooms, and they don't count all of those individual rooms as properties. Whereas with Airbnb, every single alternative accommodation is counted as a property. But just the takeaway from the left hand that I want to bring to you is a lot of supply currently uses it. It's millions of properties. And then the right hand side, we kind of spoke on that in that regional type of map, but I just wanted to kind of give the example that these OTA brands tend to own a lot of sub-brands. So there might have been actually times where you didn't know you used Booking.com or Expedia because of a different site. And examples of that is like hotels.com. It's kind of is a big site owned by Expedia. Also, Trivago also owned by a meta search engine owned by Expedia. On the Booking.com side, kayak cheap flights that you can use to kind of scan for the cheapest flights available, or Open Table for restaurant reviews that's owned. So they tend to own a lot of different brands also. And as some of you might know, that is currently renting out a spare room in your house. The OTAs don't do this for free. They tend to charge actually quite high take rates. So the take rates tend to be around 15, and it can go up to 20% in some cases. If you're an online travel platform that tends to service large chains of hotels, that's more of a Expedia type platform. Expedia tends to service the large chains in the US. You tend to struggle to ask a similar take rate than in comparison to a Booking.com that does a lot more independent hotels that don't have as much pricing power. And then we just moving to some of the drivers. We've already hinted to some of it, but what are the drivers of the OTAs over the long term? So firstly, it's just hotel online share of spend. I've hinted towards that where in the 2010s where mobile and smartphone penetration has increased, but you can see how online spend has actually increased from 30% to just below 70%. I can't remember actually the last time you phoned a B&B or a hotel actually to make a booking. I think this is probably just going to go up. And just on the right-hand side, the global market share of hotel room nights. So just focusing on Expedia and Booking.com. So their market share has actually also increased since 2015. Specifically for Booking.com, that's almost doubled their market share. So they currently have around 9%, whereas Expedia is around 3%. So not completely dominant in terms of market share. And then secondly is just room nights or hotel, the total world amount of room nights, that's also increasing. So if you think about the Western world within Europe and America, North America, the CAGR has been around 1.5 to 1.7. So let's say between 1 and 2% since 2010 in terms of room nights. Whereas in APAC, LATAM, and the Middle East, room nights have actually been growing a bit quicker. And then lastly, in terms of ADRs, so ADRs is just your average daily rate. So think of that as your hotel rate. If you look at the US, APAC, and Europe, which are some of the major regions, you can see actually that it's actually been anything between 2 to 4%. So actually, I would actually say between actually slightly higher than inflation. And the reason for that being is there's been somewhat of a premiumization push throughout the hotel industry. So putting this all together, what are the main drivers of the OTAs? That's that shift from offline to online, the taking of share within the online space, the growth of total room nights, and then lastly, that inflation component or that average daily rate that's also increasing. So just then delving deeper between the supply. So as I also hinted previously, supply is not looking the same or is not homogeneous across the OTAs. For instance, Airbnb that we spoke about does a lot more alternative accommodation, a lot less hotels. Booking.com tends to focus on independent hotels, although they have the big hotels on them. They've done a lot more to get the independent hotel on their site, whereas Expedia tends to focus on big chains. So if you can look at independent hotels, bed and breakfast and alternatives, close to 100% of their bookings will throw through the OTAs. So they're very dependent on the OTAs. And that ties into why they can charge, the OTAs can kind of charge a higher take rate. But for the large hotel chains, Hilton, IHG, Marriott, etc., close to only 20% of their online bookings actually happen through the OTAs. So they tend to have a bit more of a supplier power, and that's why you see take rates being slightly lower. So what they tend to do is they try to get the user to go through their own online site. And they try to do that also with pricing incentives, but also through loyalty programs themselves to kind of get the user and control that customer relationship. And if you go look at the distribution channel, just on the left-hand side, it's slightly dated, but it gives you an idea of that 80-20 rule that I've spoken about. For IHG distribution of their rooms, around 80% goes through online channels, whether that be web mobile directly with the hotel or through call centers, whereas only 18% goes through the OTAs, and that's how they would actually want to have it. And using the OTAs, just let's say an example, a weekend is coming up and you're not fully booked or you're not at 100% occupancy, then you will divert some of your supply to the OTAs to kind of fill that up. Because a hotel at the end of the day is very much a fixed cost business, so you make a lot more money when you're operating close to 100%. From the OTA side and on the right-hand side that I want to emphasize, bigger tends to be better because, example, Booking.com, this is just a percentage of times with the highest ranked being shown the cheapest price, specifically in Europe. So for Booking.com, the most times you're going to see a property, they're going to be the cheapest site, and that's what they work for, to be the cheapest channel, and then establish that or strengthen that relationship at the end of the day, just with the consumer. And that's also why they tend to work with the independents a bit more, because the independents you can kind of nudge into the way to get the cheapest price on their site, because they're also a lot more dependent on your specific channel. Then delving a bit into the OTA business model. Okay, so theoretically, there's two OTA business models. There's an agency business model and there's a merchant business model. In reality, most of the OTAs operate somewhere in between and not skew one side or the other. But let's start firstly with what's an agency business model. So I want you to think of an agency business model as actually very much similar to a classifieds business, in the sense where the OTA is only showing you the advertisement, and you at the end of the day still making the booking and paying the hotel directly. So you're only going to maybe see the advertisement online, and only then when you check out at the time at the hotel, pay the hotel, whether that can be in person or that can be online. Whereas in the merchant side of the business model, the OTA tends to control a lot of the inventory in its site, and it can kind of influence the pricing on the site. And if you go look at the payment flow, you are going to pay the OTA. The OTA is going to sit with the money, and only when you check out your hotel, the OTA is going to pass on the pricing towards the hotel. So in this merchant model, the OTA plays a lot more of a bigger role in the travel value chain. They tend to charge a higher take rate. And if you go look at the split, what I said, that non-OTA actually operates on one side or the other, they tend to operate in the middle. I'm just using Booking.com here because they actually split their gross bookings actually quite nicely. You can see since 2017, their business model has heavily shifted towards this merchant business model, and away from the agency. And why they want to do this: firstly, they have a greater control over the pricing. Secondly, it's the ability to create package tours, because suddenly you control a lot of that inventory, and you can sell a package trip to, let's say, Spain, with this flight ticket and staying at this hotel at this price. You can better control the customer experience, because you're not just a classified business, you're doing a lot of the customer servicing also. If there tends to be, or there needs to be a refund, you control it, because the money sits with you. It doesn't sit with the hotel. And then just lastly, which is just also a nice bonus, which you see in the financials, is because of the upfront cash receipt, it improves the cash conversion a lot more. So I'm just going to reiterate that point. With the merchant business model, the traveler pays the OTA. The OTA then keeps that money, and only when the traveler checks out, when he already stayed at the hotel, then the OTA only pays the merchant. And the quickest way you can actually see whether OTA is shifting more to merchant or to agent from their financials is go looking at the free cash flow, so the cash that they're generating on the cash flow statement versus the net income that they're reporting in the income statement. And you can see here from the right-hand side, and to a certain extent here for Trip.com, is that the cash that they generated was significantly ahead of the net income. So it's very highly cash generative businesses, and they benefit of that timing difference between when the booking takes place and when you actually have to pay the hotel. Okay, and now going to a section that everyone is probably very focused on understanding, and is AI eating the OTA? So currently the market is debating between two scenarios on how the future is going to play out. And this is actually not just relevant for OTAs. You can think of any platform business. I think it's kind of the main debate sits between these two models, and we constantly shift between what is more likely between the two. But let's say in scenario one is, I think, which is more beneficial to the OTA, is where the user still goes to a Booking.com platform. Within that platform, Booking.com controls or has its own AI agent that it can help you to get a more personalized experience. And then that the booking still throws through the OTA then in the scenario. But what's important in this scenario is the OTA still controls the customer relationship. So by controlling the customer relationship, they can serve you a lot more ads, which obviously makes a lot more money for the internet platforms. They can also focus on increasing customer engagement and frequency. What I mean by that is just your customer loyalty with the platform, which is obviously quite good for them. And then this scenario, we tend to think that take rates tend to be quite stable. This is kind of, we're building on the old paradigm. We're just adding an AI agent that sits within the AI platform. And we're kind of seeing this in this business model in the e-commerce world already. I think that in the e-commerce world is kind of the furthest developed in this. And I'm just going to use Amazon as an example. So Amazon currently has a Rufus chatbot that currently sits on the platform, and then you can chat to Rufus on certain product selectments. That is kind of the business model or scenario that I'm describing in scenario one. And in scenario two is, I think, where the OTA tends to lose. And this is where the user uses a number of external agents, whether that be ChatGPT, Booking.com, can be any other agent also, that to make a booking, so agentic booking at the end of the day. The agent then goes to the OTA and then makes the booking, In this scenario, the OTA actually loses this direct customer relationship that it previously had. And the OTA actually just becomes a supply provider. So no longer having that demand side relationship that we previously spoke about, but it just supplies, it's just a supplier of the hotel, basically, capacity. In this scenario, the OTA's take rate that we showed probably gets a bit compressed, and it loses out on auxiliary income streams, basically like advertising, doing package tours, etc. What we have currently seen have been playing out year to date is the OTAs have actually gone for a multi-pronged strategy, and having direct relationships with the LLM providers, specifically Booking.com and Expedia have relationships with ChatGPT that we'll talk about just in the next few slides. But they've also started with this building an AI agent on the platform. So Booking.com has Penny, whereas Trip.com has Trip Genie. And I think in the recent results call, the Booking CEO, Glenn Fogel, actually described it nicely, what they're trying to achieve and what their vision is. And I'm just going to quickly read it. My vision has always been to treat customers like they used to be treated when they used to go to human travel agents back in the day, who knew so much about you and offered you what you really wanted and was able to get you the value that really matched up with what you can afford. So just it's basically a more personalized experience, having then your own travel agent that knows what you can afford, where you want to travel, and what you tend to like. So that's kind of the vision that they're going towards. But on the other side, I've already spoken about this relationships that they're also building with the LLM providers. We haven't seen actually that agentic part actually play out. And I'll go into the next slide. The expectations kind of versus reality. We haven't seen you just telling LLM, okay, book me a hotel in South Bank in London for 2 nights. This is my price. That hasn't played out. And what actually has played out on a year-to-date basis is that ChatGPT, similar to what Google Travel was in the 2010s and currently, has become more of a product discovery engine rather than an agentic commerce engine. So I'm throwing a lot of buzzwords here that people tend to use, but it's actually very simple. So agentic commerce, again, is where the agent has control over the booking completely. Product discovery is just you searching based on your preferences and then getting results back. So just summarize or showing here ChatGPT, if you currently say Booking.com, find me a hotel in London close to South Bank available from 1 to 5 to July, needs to be around £400 per night. Then it gives you back a list of hotels. And this is funny enough, quite similar to how Google Travel looks, where you basically put in the hotel that you want, the hotel that you want, the dates that you want, and then Google tends to give you some ideas. And this type of model is actually quite good for the OTAs. And the reason for that being product discovery, the largest OTAs, if you go look at the operating cost structure, around 64% of their costs tend to go to sales and marketing. So it's long been rumored that the OTAs are some of the largest advertising spenders on Google. So if you also just give a benefit to scale at the end of the day, but if you're a large OTA, you can spend more on advertising to get your properties higher up in the list, and makes the user actually then click on that property directly. And then you tend to use that platforms a bit more when you build up your consumer loyalty programs, because then you tend to get discounts. So it's like this flywheel that tends to happen. So in a product discovery world, the OTAs, we think, tend to be actually well positioned. And then the second part of this is actually from the search engines or the LLM providers themselves. it's not bad for them to be a product discovery engine because they tend to generate a lot of high margin advertising revenue, and they don't have to sit with the consumer directly, providing consumer services to them, providing payment gateways with currency translation. So this scenario can potentially be quite a win-win scenario if it's just a product discovery type of scenario. And we have seen evidence of this actually starting to come forward. So a lot of you probably saw earlier in the year that OpenAI plans to cut back on side projects and just to nail their core business. So this was them shifting from consumer a lot more into enterprise as well. This shift actually also they brought down, or they emphasized less of the agentic offerings, or the investments within agentic, and have focused a lot more into enterprise. So I think from OpenAI's perspective, there's a signal that they also realize that the agentic part of that problem is going to be quite difficult to solve, and they would rather focus on enterprise. So we've kind of seen a shift also from their side. And then lastly, I just want to go through the financials of these businesses quickly. So from a revenue perspective, both Trip.com, Booking.com have been growing healthy around above 10% for the last few years. Obviously, COVID had a negative impact in 2020, and then you came from this low base. In Trip.com's case, China's lockdowns have actually been a bit more elongated, as we know, so the recovery took a bit longer. From an operating margin perspective, and this is just one of the major benefits of internet platform businesses, is that they tend to be high fixed cost in nature. So as you generate as you scale and you generate a lot of revenue, your margins tend to scale with that. So we've actually seen since the recovery of COVID, margins have started to increase, and the same can be said for Trip.com. So what that means at the end of the day, so if you have revenue growing above 10% and then you have margins increasing, your EPS or your earnings per share tends to grow a bit faster. So just for Bookings.com here, the EPS grew around 20%, and for Trip.com grew around 70% in the last year. I've spoken about this free cash flow already, but I want to hone just in the last slide, what is the additional benefit of this high free cash flow conversion from an investor perspective? And that has been that Booking.com, as well as the other OTA industry as a whole, have been very shareholder friendly in terms of cash returns to shareholders. Because they are currently generating more free cash than their net income, and there tends to be that timing difference. We spoke about this or discussed it when we looked at the merchant versus agent business models. They tend to use that cash to repurchase a lot of shares. So you can just see how the share count for Booking.com specifically have just been coming down throughout the years, and that then flows through to the EPS growth rate. I just have here the total shareholder return, so they pay a small divvy plus the shareholder purchase. It kind of nets out to close to a 6% yield currently. So historically, what you've gotten with Booking.com is that 10% revenue growth, a bit of margins, and then share increation, and then share repurchase and divvies, and that gets you to a high teens EPS growth, which has been very healthy. Yeah, that's all from my side. I hope that everyone's learned a bit about the OTA industry. I'm just going to move on to some Q&A now, I think.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christoff. That was great. Maybe we can kick off with some questions. So the first one, your slides show that OTA markets are regionally structured. Why has no single global winner taken the whole market?
So just summarizing actually of why there tends to be initially a regional player, and then you tend to see the global guys come in. is that initial shift from online or from offline to online takes a lot of effort and investment. And we actually saw that a bit in South Africa. Lekker firstly needed to get the B&B in Bloemfontein or something to start to use an online platform. And once they've actually used that online platform, the switching cost to go from to an Airbnb, or to have your listing on an Airbnb or booking.com, that might actually have a better reach and more of a marketing that goes out, that then tends to become easy. So I would summarize that the question, that initially you tend to get a lot of regional players, and as that industry comes a bit more online, you tend to see the large platforms grow a lot quicker, and that has actually played out in the last few years.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And then, is the OTA take rate sustainable, or should we expect hotels to push back harder over time?
That is a good question. So this is the reason why most of the OTAs, like Booking.com or Airbnb, tend to focus on the independent supply, because they tend to get better take rates from that. And platform like Expedia, that has more exposure towards the large chain, you tend to be more, they tend to have a bit more pricing power. So yes, and I think that's played out in the strategy of the OTAs, of kind of staying away from or trying to get away from the large hotel platforms, because that's where you might see some take rate competition or take rate compression.
Thank you. And then maybe last question from us is, why have the OTAs remained relevant even though hotels and airlines can sell directly to customers?
I think that actually comes down to, I want to actually show this slide just quickly again. OTAs aren't just a classified business where you go online, make a booking, make a purchase, and then pay the end user in cash, whatever. There's both demand side advantages of using an OTA and supply side advantages. And it's both that, I think, that has just grown the moat of the business that we've spoken about, and have kept them relevant. The number of properties on the site is unrivaled, so that's why the demand wants to use it. It's trusted brands. You don't want to go to Thailand and not knowing if your property is necessarily there, or whether that be in any other country in Europe. And from the supply side, a lot of the supply, the independent side, just don't have the capability to get themselves online. And the OTAs provide an easy platform for them to get access to also millions of customers. So I think that's actually, both from the demand and the supply side strengths, have allowed them to remain relevant.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, Christoff. I think we'll leave it there. But a big thanks to you for the presentation, and to the audience for all of your engagement and questions. If there are any further questions, please could you reach out to us, and we'll be happy to respond or set up a meeting. And thank you all again for joining. We look forward to seeing you on the 11th of June, where we'll be discussing some of the memory names, specifically looking at Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron. Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye, everyone.